Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. Today we're going to take on a very beautiful part of Jewish life, a part of Jewish life that we don't talk about so much. And it's time to bring it back to the forefront. We talk a lot about the actions of Judaism. Judaism is a very action-oriented faith. But how often do you encounter the thinking part of Judaism? We even talk about the speaking parts of Judaism, the things you're not allowed to speak. A lot of talking, prayer, the words are very important. But have you ever encountered the importance of the thought processes of Judaism? What we call kavana, intention. Obviously, it's ethereal, it's abstract, it's far less hard and fast. It's not tangible and therefore far more difficult to quantify and define. But this is the essence of what we're going to talk about today as we journey our way through the flood of Noah. We're learning about the great flood of Noah. We're learning about the deluge and why God would have wanted to destroy mankind with this great flood. If you're a Bible critic, I can see why you might lose faith in religion or in God. God just created the world. It was 1,000 years prior. It was a relatively fresh and brand new world. And then God loses his temper. People become corrupt. The land is filled with Hamas, and the Hebrew term Hamas means corruption or violence. And then God decides to flood them all, to drown them all. It sounds very aggressive. It sounds like God needs anger management therapy, maybe a rage room. Have you heard about the new trend? It's all the rage. You go to a rage room and you break things, and you pay for this stuff, right? Sounds like God could use some rage therapy. You read it, and it's like, what's going on over here, right? But the way that the Alter Rebbe explains it in the discourse that we're learning from 1807, the way the Alter Rebbe explains it is that if God wanted to destroy the world, he had many, many, many different ways to do that. And God has exercised other such ways. We've seen creative ways of destruction, of surgical strikes throughout the 10 plagues and other places in Jewish history. Korach, God just swallowed them up in a sinkhole. Bam, it was done. Could have done that to the bad guys and left the good guys. It would have been nice and clean, right? No, he had to make a mess to drown the world in the deluge. And the reason is because the Alter Rebbe explains that the purpose of the flood was not only to destroy. The purpose of the flood was, in fact, to purify. It was a mikvah. It was a ritual bath. It was an immersive experience of purification intended to purify the corrupt and evil inhabitants of this world, so that like a person comes out of a mikvah. We were just asking about somebody going to the mikvah today in their wedding day, right, Mordechai? Yeah. And somebody asked, why do you go to mikvah? Well, maybe the question was, why do you fast, I think. Right. But the question is, why do you go to mikvah? Because the mikvah is added holiness. There's two parts to the mikvah. There's a mikvah going from a state of impurity to a state of purity, which we don't really do today because in temple times, you weren't allowed to eat certain foods. You weren't allowed to access certain areas if you were in a state of ritual impurity. Ritual impurity is the result of coming in contact with a dead body. You went to a funeral, you went to a cemetery, you went to a hospital, a morgue, come in contact with one of the 7 rodents. Chameleon, what are they? Whatever they are, rats. You touch the rat, or you're in the same thing as the rat. Or maybe there's a seminal emission would render a person impure. So you'd have to reach a state of purity to be able to become purified. That happens through the mikvah. But in addition to that, there's something called Tvilas Ezra, which is the Ezra mikvah dipping. Ezra was the leader of the Jewish people when they came out of Babylon and they came out of Persia to build the second temple 2,300 years ago. Ezra formalized Judaism, by the way that we know it. It's 95% of Judaism, the way that we know it, was instituted by the men of the great assembly who instituted prayer books and the Seder of Pesach and the order of prayer and much of the institutionalized components of Judaism. One of the things that they instituted were the mikveh, the requirement to go to mikveh every day for a male. Now, this did not catch on, by the way. Only the Hasidic Jews really grabbed onto this, but it didn't become like a mainstream thing for whatever reason. But the purpose of it is to go not only from a state of impurity to a state of purity, but even to go from a state of purity to a state of higher purity. And that's something which you want to do every day if you're able to lift yourself up from whatever spiritual schmutz you might be enmeshed in or immersed in. And certainly on a wedding day or on a special day, you want to do that. So on the day before Yom Kippur, we go to the mikvah, for example. It's a very special experience to go to the mikvah on the day before Yom Kippur. So wrapping it up, what happened in the Great Flood was that the world was purified from a state of intense impurity to a state of purity. Now, what I want, just before I take your questions, what I want to tie that up with is that on a deeply personal level, remember what Chabad Hasidus does. Chabad Hasidus is not abstract wisdom. It's Chachma bin Das, which means idea, understanding, and personal application. Das is personal application, which I call feeling. If you haven't been personally moved by an idea in Hasidus, you've not understood it. If an idea that you've learned in Hasidus stays here, you've not understood anything. You've not fulfilled the mitzvah of Torah study. It's got to go from here to here. When it's here, when you're feeling it, that's when you know that you've experienced Chochmah Bina Das Chabad levels, and now you've given birth to an emotion. So how does the Alter Rebbe do that right now? What he does is, he says the flood, you know what the flood is? The chaos of making a living, which is overwhelming. That overwhelming chaos, the anarchy, the crisis where you just feel like you can't breathe. You're suffocating from the bills and the obligations and the responsibilities. And just when you think you're about to drown, another email comes in about some missed deadline or some court appearance or some traffic ticket or some angry neighbor that your dog pooped in his yard and you didn't pick it up. And you're like, I can't do it anymore. So this, says the Alter Rebbe, is the great flood. This is why God needed to destroy the world through the flood, because it's not just a story of history. It's a story of my story, not his story. It's my story. It's personal. Why does God give us these anxieties? Why does God give us these challenges, these troubles, these obstacles, these overwhelming, suffocating struggles? So that like the great flood, we will emerge more pure. After enduring these anxieties, we will emerge stronger spiritually elevated and uplifted. And that is how we open today's lesson, where we're going to learn. The question is, why? Why would it be that by going through the troubles of having to get accepted to college and going into college and finding a job and getting a job, that's assuming, by the way, that you need college to get a job, which I think has been proven as a fallacy, but that's a total unnecessary component. The professor here doesn't like that. It's fine, okay? But you're entitled to your opinion, right?
Not everybody should go to college, but college does help some people.
Right. I've heard that. I'm so sorry. I'm totally getting on a tangent, but let me just finish this point. I'll take your questions. I heard from major philanthropists that told me recently that I think the statistics were 30% of people that go to college don't get a job based on their college degree. And those that do, 30% of them are overqualified for what they need. That's what I heard. I don't know about whatever. Anyways, back to you, Mendel Chaim. What were you going to say?
Go back to Mikvah every day. So now I have a swimming pool. Can I use that?
Great question about the mikvah. So if you have a swimming pool, it's a new home, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. So the question is, can you go to mikvah in a swimming pool? Now, to go from a state of impurity to a state of purity, you need a proper mikvah. That's the first kind of mikvah, right? Which would be the biblical command of the mikvah. So for that one, you need a real kosher mikvah, which would include, by the way, like a river or
the ocean.
The ocean, yeah. A swimming pool is not technically a kosher mikvah, but it would qualify for the tevilah of Ezra, for the dipping of Ezra, which was the one from purity to elevated purity. Okay, which means a woman has to go to a kosher mikvah, because a woman is going for menstruation reasons, which is a biblical obligation, right? Even today, a woman is not allowed to be in contact with her husband until after menstruation, until she goes to the mikvah, 12 or 13 days later, right? So a woman needs to have a kosher mikvah. A man doesn't have that biblical obligation, so he can use a swimming pool, but it's advisable that when you go to the mikveh in your pool, and you should go every day, disrobe, not wearing anything, the filter should be off. Okay, what was your question?
I'm now back at the ocean every morning.
Oh, the ocean is fine. There's no filter there. You can just go in. Yeah, but you're supposed to disrobe in there, though.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do that.
We don't want Steve getting arrested. You know?
Yes.
I thought you were going to say something else.
Yeah.
Is there a prayer that you say when you go?
No, the women say a prayer because they go from a state of impurity to a state of biblical impurity to purity. Remember, it's not that the women are dirty, God forbid.
Right.
It's a state of spiritual contamination, it's a state of spiritual cleanliness. They do say a blessing, Allah Tvila, I think they say. The men don't say a blessing on it.
You have to submerge.
Entirely submerged all at one time. By the way, if you don't have a mikvah and you need to go to the mikvah, you are allowed to go to the shower with an unbroken chain of flow of water. It's the same status of the mikvah, the swimming pool status, right? Which is not the biblical one, but the rabbinical one. If you go if you stand in the shower with an unbroken flow of water, you don't step in and out for 4 minutes. At full flow, that would be considered also a state of spiritual cleansing. Just FYI. Anyways.
So in the morning, if I take a shower and I just stand.
Yes, 4 minutes. You got it. That's what I said. So let me just say, so what's the answer to our question? The question is how we open our Mayim today. The question is why? Why is it? Good morning to you too, gentlemen. Why is it that, and Christian from New Mexico, why is it that enduring challenges makes us better? Why is it that a soul, before it descended into this world, was in a state of spiritual nirvana? Doing well. Why is it that descending into the darkness of this world, the spiritual darkness, the struggles, the anti-Semitism, the drowning of this world, that would cause the soul to emerge with more love? That's what we learned yesterday, right? Like King Solomon said, that the great waters, the tumultuous waters in Song of Songs, the tumultuous waters will not extinguish the love of the soul, but in fact enhance it. Why is that? Why is it that they will enhance the love of the soul? Why is that? The answer that the Alter Rebbe gives today is that it's by engaging in the anxieties of this world and then meditating upon them. It's the act of meditation that will allow you to experience enhanced spiritual connection far greater than the connection that you experienced before encountering those anxieties. It's the power of meditation, which means I'm just going to give a quick example of this. So let's say you establish a country and you're living in peace. Let's say it's 1947, 48. Israel declares independence, right? Imagine that there was no wars, right? It would be fine. Life would be good. But then imagine it's attacked and then it wins a war. So what happens now? Is Israel stronger after winning the war or weaker than it was before? Stronger. Like today, when there's a US Newsweek or World Report published a list of the strongest armies in the world. It's quite interesting to look at it. Russia's at number 1. Don't know how that happened. America's at number 2, but number 3, Israel. It's a very interesting list. I don't know where Russia comes into number 1. America's at number 2, but whatever. I mean, you go figure, But for Israel, tiny Israel to be at number 3 is absolutely breathtaking. It's a showstopper. You like Israel? Israel's like the size of Moscow, right? It's the size of like the size of New Jersey. It's like a little nothing. And that's the third strongest army in the world, because after encountering the great challenges of fighting the wars from every single direction and coming out on top, respect, right?
Well, they create new technology.
Yeah, and they're tested and they're challenged and their soldiers are battle ready, right?
Their technology advances in each war.
Right, out of necessity. So like Christian says, it causes growth. The challenge forces you to grow, right? So when we face our financial anxieties, our floods, you have 2 ways to react to your flood. One is through fight or flight. Okay. One is to surrender and to give up and say, look, I have no time for my spirituality because I have to make a living. Mm-hmm. Many people take that approach, right? Then there's the other approach, which is to say that I'm actually going to use the financial anxieties to deepen my faith. Right? There's a beautiful poem here. Here, I'm going to read you this poem. I got up early one morning and rushed right into the day. I had so much to accomplish that I didn't take time to pray. Problems just tumbled about me. It's my flood, right? And heavier came each task. Why doesn't God help me? I wondered. He answered, you didn't ask. I wanted to see joy and beauty, but the day toiled on gray and bleak. I wondered why God didn't show me. He said, but you didn't seek. I tried to come into God's presence. I used all my keys at the lock. God gently and lovingly chided, my child, you didn't knock. I woke up early this morning and paused before entering the day. I had so much to accomplish that I had to take time to pray. Right? That's a different approach. It's the opposite. It's the opposite angle. So that's what we're going to learn about now. Let's take a look at this text inside, and then we'll try to deepen our relationship with Jewish meditation. So page 162, the verse states, it's a bit of a summary. 162. We're in the Chayenu, if you have this. The verse states, many waters, this is just a summary of what we learned so far. Many waters cannot extinguish the love, nor can rivers wash it away. That quote from Song of Songs. You're in the wrong book. The Mayim explains that many waters of King Solomon refers to the worries and burdens of earning a livelihood. These many waters cannot extinguish the soul's passionate love for God. On the contrary, through engaging with them, the soul rises higher than its pre-embodied state, transforming darkness into light by subduing and sublimating material concerns. But what does this mean? What can be even greater than the light of the divine that a person raises to through their challenges? You're telling me my mortgage, my mortgage and my interest payments are going to lift me up higher than I was up in heaven? I mean, how does that even make sense? And how exactly does surviving a deluge of worry about financial stability cause the soul to rise higher than it had been in heaven, basking in the light of the divine? The Mayim will explain that this is accomplished by making all that one sees in this world the object of meditation, hitbonenut, hisbonenus, especially during prayer. When we meditate, and we're going to talk about how to meditate. When we meditate, what we're doing is that we're doubling down into the darkness, into the spiritual darkness, and we're uncovering the true spiritual root of the darkness. We're discovering the presence of God, not only where the light shines, but even where the light don't shine. And when we do that, even when we discover the light of God present, even in the darkest of places, even in the crises and problems of our lives, that's when you discover the deepest and most meaningful connection to God that you ever could have prior. Let's analyze that in a second.
What happens outside the comfort zone?
Interesting, like the hostages, like Omer Shem Tov. Omer Shem Tov, who said what a perfect example. He spoke here in our show a few days ago, and he said that I sat in the most intense darkness. It was palpable. You cannot imagine how dark was. And he said, there I found the greatest light of all. How beautiful. Yes, beautiful. What a great analogy. That is the most perfect analogy, Steve, to be able to apply what we're talking about tonight. And think of yourself as the hostage. Think of yourself when you're struggling with the struggles of making a living, of keeping your head above water. You're treading water. It's not a Hamas terrorist, but it is a landlord, right? It is a HOA. It is a IRS takes what?
Employer.
It's an employer, exactly. It's the challenges of making a living, and you're grappling with darkness. You could either surrender to the darkness and say, "I give up," or you could meditate and reorient the darkness as the intensity of light. Let's take a look in the text here, page 163.
Outside the comfort zone.
Growth always happens outside of the comfort zones. No growth happens in the comfort zone. Right, nice. Page 163. For when one spends all day involved in physical matters, burdened with earning a living amidst the world's darkness, they can then reflect during prayer on what they've seen, remembering that no blade of grass grows below that does not have a spiritual source above. The same is true of every single thing in existence. I just want to pause a second. Can you imagine? You got to think during prayer, what is my problem today? What is bothering me today? Today, I'm worried about an election in New York. Tomorrow, I'm worried about if my bank manager is going to accept my application. I'm worried about if my boss is going to acquiesce to my request. I'm worried about if my, whatever you're worried about, you think about it from two perspectives. The shallow perspective would be to say, I'm fearful. I'm afraid of the election result. I'm afraid of the bank manager's meeting. I'm afraid of the boss's decision. But the deeper approach is to meditate in prayer and say, there's no part of this world that exists without God creating it at every single moment in time. It's the doctrine of perpetual creation. The bank manager could not possibly exist if not that God was creating him at any moment, at every moment in time. Zoran Mamdani
God wanted him to win.
cannot be if not that Hashem was speaking him into existence at this very instant. Now, what does that do to you? That's a bit of a short circuit in your brain. You're like, what?
That's how we're flooded.
Hamas terrorists couldn't exist if not that God wanted them to. I mean, for those of you here last night, and the mother of Ori Danino spoke here, it was like a short circuit. I was doing the translating for her. I had no idea what she was going to say. She said, my son was executed by Hamas terrorists, and I say, thank you, God. And I'm like, I was like, I couldn't even process what she was saying. I mean, I was just doing the translating, and I was like, dust mine ears, deceive me. I mean, it was incredible, profound. She says with tears streaming down her face. The depth of her faith was breathtaking, was astounding. That's obviously an extreme example, very difficult for us to relate to. But when we look at the challenges of today, and thank God most of us don't have to deal with those kind of challenges. But if the challenges of today, you have to stand in front of the board, in front of the grievance committee at your local country club. It can be very intimidating, right? But imagine that in prayer you meditate and you say, I'm not afraid of them. You know why I'm not afraid of them? Because I know that God is creating them at every single moment in time. I know that there's no such thing as a blade of grass that has no angel above, which is in a process of evolution that draws down from the blessings, the nurture, the nourishment, the vitality that comes straight from God. The mazalos, now this gets a little bit technical here. When we say the word mazal, which we're going to get, let me just explain before we go and finish it in the text. The word mazal, mazal tov, right? Mazal tov, what does mazal tov mean? Luck. What does luck mean in English? Nothing. Luck doesn't mean anything. Luck means randomness, I think, right? So luck is a very bad translation, in my personal opinion. I don't think we need to use the word luck, because the word luck, I think we should delete it from our lexicon. And I'm speaking to myself right now because I do say the word good luck to people. But what I mean is good fortune. Luck means randomness, like whatever, how the cookie crumbled, how the dice. There's no such thing as randomness. We don't believe in coincidence. We believe the very word in Hebrew for coincidence, mikre, is the letters Rakme Hashem, which means only from God. Or Hashem Rakam, God embroidered, right? The word coincidence in its root is God's plan, right? There's no such thing as coincidence. I think we need to divest of this word luck and replace it with fortune, with destiny. What that means is, mazel means good destiny. It means like this, that if God intended in this Rosh Hashanah that you should make $1.3 million this year, right? Nice. Pretty good, right? Could have been worse, right? If God decreed in Rosh Hashanah and Kippur that you should make $1.3 million this year, then what happens? It sits in a vault, and it's waiting to be distributed. It's already allocated, but it's not being distributed. It's an escrow account. So what do you do? So therefore, we have to pray that God should, what's the word? Release. Should disperse, right? Disperse the funds into my account. They shouldn't just remain in a spiritual credit, right? So how does that work? It goes through a process where, it starts off as a spiritual entity, right? And becomes until ultimately it transfers into US dollars in your bank account, right? So that's the process, yeah.
I use the notion of a cistern that holds water. My understanding of mazel is it's Mayim zuzim, where your waters flow together.
Okay, interesting. I never heard of that interpretation. It's nice. So what happens now is that in much the same way, God distributes our blessings through a series of evolution, and that evolution is called mazalot. Mazalot. They are the conduits through which the blessing reaches us. Mazalot, also known as angels. The mazel is an angel, which means when you say to somebody mazel tov, you're saying good angel. In other words, may the angel you encounter be the good angel of disbursement, the angel of credit, and not the angel of debit. Right? That's what you're saying with mazel tov, right? So when we say that there's no such thing as a blade of grass that grows below that doesn't have a spiritual source above, that doesn't have a mazel above, it means there's no such thing as a blade of grass that doesn't have an angel through which its blessing disperses from heaven all the way down to the blade of grass, right? So let's apply that. The mazalos are the celestial influences, they're the angels that provide life to this entire world. They are the conduits through which the blessing reaches to this world. As it is written, from the precious yields of the sun and from the precious produce. The mazalos in turn receive from the 17 ministers as a process of evolution, the angels. They receive from the dregs of the Ophanim, receive from the angels, and so on, higher above high. So there's a process of evolution. When you're saying mazel tov, you're saying that the angel you encounter should be the angel of disbursement, the angel that delivers, that takes that 1.3 million and turns it into US dollars, right? So we recognize that every single thing that exists is existing only by a chain of command, like marionette puppets, which is governed from above, that conduct it, that infuse it with life and vitality and energy, whether it's good or bad or ugly, everything is from God. And now what happens is I divest of fear and I'm infused with confidence. I'm infused with faith, right? I'm going to just skip to the bottom of the page. One further reflects that this entire system, this grand hierarchy of spiritual forces that ascend through countless ranks, all come into being from absolute nothingness. Page 164. How does that happen? By virtue of God's attribute of kingship, and as it is written, your kingship is a kingship of all worlds. So we see this the doctrine of perpetual creation. But where does it originate from? It comes from God's lowest aspect, which is known as the attribute of malchus. Malchus, which means God's distribution account. Malchus is God's escrow account. It's the 10th attribute. Divine Malchus, moreover, represents merely the radiance of the divine presence, mere illumination relative to its blessed essence, which is truly infinite. So we're recognizing that the source of our blessing is even is God's escrow account, which is not even God's essence. It's like God's
The treatise.
what?
The treatise is dregs.
The dregs, okay? I like a ray of sunlight, like a ray of sunlight compared to the sun itself. We recognize that everything is governed by God, but not even by God's essence, by God's his radiance. Like the ray of the sun versus the sun. We're not even touching the greatness of God. So who should I be intimidated by? Mamdani or by God? Who should hold who should hold weight in my heart? It's not the anti-Semite. It's nothing of a nothing, right? Though all that exists flows from God, he himself stands absolutely removed from it. God is you can't even compare, anything that exists in this physical world to God's essence. It's not even, it's like nothing. He was, is, and will be without change, as we say in Adon Olam. You are he before the world was created, and you are the very same after the world was created. So here's where we're going. So we're saying that it's through this meditation that we are going to be able to encounter a reorientation of the darkness. A reorientation of our fears. Then what's going to happen is like this. King Solomon says also in Song of Songs that the light is greater than the darkness, right? We've learned that before. The light is greater than the darkness. You don't need to be a genius, or you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that the light is better than the darkness. But when you read into the wisdom of the wisest of all men, you realize that what he was saying was not simply that light is better than dark. He was saying that the light that emerges from the darkness is far greater than the light that never was challenged by darkness. He's saying that a yeshiva student who's never had to work a day in his life has a far weaker faith than the businessman who grappled with making a living and yet managed to maintain his faith. Because the light that comes out of the darkness is far more intense than the light that was never challenged by darkness. We're going to learn that within the darkness is rooted a far more intense light. So when you reorient the darkness, you unleash a far greater passion, a far greater commitment, right? We're going to learn about that. We can expand on that topic. I want to unravel this beautiful idea one step at a time. But let's summarize what we've learned today. We've learned today that the purpose of the Great Flood was not only to destroy, but in fact to purify. On a personal level, that means that the purpose of our financial anxieties is not because God hates us, but because he's trying to lift us up. How does financial anxieties lift us up? Because it forces us to ponder the spiritual origins of our troubles. We do that through meditation and prayer. When we do that, we're able to uncover the intensity of light that emerges from the darkness, as opposed to the light that never had to grapple with the darkness. We'll unpack that detail much more in the subsequent parts of this mimer. But I want to just point out to you one thing like this. So what is actual meditation? Now, we don't have so much time to really get into this right now, but I want to just say this. Meditation, we're going to learn about 5 levels of meditation. This is through the teachings of Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman, one of the great spiritual mentors of the yeshiva, the Chabad yeshiva in Kfar Chabad. This would have been about 50 years ago. He was in my father's time. So the first level of meditation, which I want to share with you, is to take an idea like we're learning right now, and just to unpack the concepts in your head. That's it. You take an idea, like a chapter in Tanya or an idea that we learned today, and you just review it in your head to the point that you're not reading it, you're not getting stuck in distraction. You're just focusing on the light of the idea, on the wisdom. You're just focusing on the wisdom. You're just immersing yourself in the wisdom. That's a step that we can all do. As you leave here today, you can sit in your car and turn your phone off and just spend 5 minutes just thinking about what we learned. And that's a form of meditation. That's it. Level 2 of meditation is when you take that idea that you've already learned and you're capable of explaining it to someone else without using any of the original words. So in other words, if you can take an idea and take full ownership of it to the point that using your own words, your own analogies, you're not talking about Noah and the Great Flood, you're not talking about the Alter Rebbe, you're not talking about anything. You've made it yours to the point that you can explain it even to a fool. It says the greatness of King Solomon. It's not translation. No. It's not translation. Translation, it's you making your own words. It's using your own words. Right? Because when you use the original words, it could very possibly be that you're not entirely understanding it. Right? This is, you may have noticed, this is my style of teaching. This level 2 is my style of teaching. What I try to do is I always try to move away from the original text. I always try to use my own words, my own metaphors, my own analogies, because I feel that that's what's going to make it more personal. Certainly for me. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I thought that was.
If you're using a translation, you're using the original text. That's what a translation is, using the original ideas.
Okay.
But it's fine. It's good. It's got to grow in yourself. So level 1 would be to review the translation. Level 2 would be to make the translation your own. You could listen to a sermon, okay, a speech, a TED talk, and then you could repeat that speech to someone else in the original context. You say they went through A, B, C, D, and E, right? And you repeated the speech. That's great. That's level 1 meditation. But level 2 of meditation is when you just process the whole thing so well, you see it. You're not just hearing it. And you can see it because it's become yours. And now you can make your own sequence, your own process, your own ideas. That's no longer translation. This is now application. Yes.
It's like taking those ideas and applying it to your life and explaining it that way through that.
Yes, exactly. So for example, let's say you're a Let's say you're a scientist. Okay, so you'll take an idea that you learned in Chassidus, and you'll say, well, actually, in my line of work, this is something which I do on a subatomic level, and you start meditating on that part of it, which the teacher doesn't even know about, because the teacher doesn't know about the subatomic particles and neutrons, right? So, if you're a brain scientist and you know about how the brain works, and you can use that metaphor, analogy, example, then what's happened is that you put it into your own words.
It's an
entirely.
interpretation, right?
It's an application. It's an application. I'm going to stop over here because we're going way over time. What?
It's a restatement rather than plagiarizing. Restating
Right, it's not plagiarizing, yeah. But all of this is within the mind. And if you can do all of this within the mind, this is what you need to be thinking about. I want to encourage you to take ownership. We've only done 2 out of 5 levels of meditation. We'll go through them eventually. But I want you to think about this for a moment. Which part of Hasidus do you own? This is the question I'm leaving you with today. If somebody approached you, and if I asked you today, which is your favorite chapter of Tanya? What are you going to tell me? Chuck's going to roll his eyes because he's got so many to pick from, right? Which chapter of Tanya changed your life the most? Think about that. And if you don't have an answer to that, then learn it again.
Reread it.
Yeah. Yesterday afternoon, an 8-year-old boy in our Hebrew school came over to me and he said, Rabbi Vigler, I want you to know I just finished learning the whole Tanya with you. Very smart little boy. He sits with his father in the car and they listen to the Tanya YouTubes and they listen to it. He said, I just finished the whole Tanya with you. Can you imagine, 8-year-old boy?
Wow.
So I want you to know that I want you to think about this. Which part of Hasidus do I own to the point that I can do level 1 meditation, that I can review it at a moment's notice? I was sitting at the Western Wall for Motzi Shabbos. I was sitting at the Western Wall, Motzi Shabbos, with my family members. We were just like singing songs. It was beautiful. It was like 5 p.m. as the sun was setting, and we were singing beautiful Nigunim, the Western Wall. And one of my brothers started singing the Nigun before a Mayim, the Nigun before a discourse. Now, normally a person would have to recite a discourse. Somebody would have prepared. So he looks at me and he says, David, can you say a discourse? I said, fine. So he's saying the Nigun, and I went straight in to say a discourse because I need to know this car's got fuel, right? I don't drive on empty, right? I need to have something in my head. What did you meditate upon this morning, folks? And if somebody asks you to share a piece of Hasidus, you got to have it at the tip of your tongue. It's got to be ready to go out the gate, hit the ground running. So when my brother asked you to review a discourse, I said, no problem. Which one, right? Because you got to be ready. And that's the question I leave you with today. Which is the idea of Hasidus, the chapter of Tanya, the Sikha, the talk of the Rebbe, the concept, the letter of the Rebbe. It could be anything from Hasidus. Which is it that you own so much that you'll bring it up on the golf course, you'll bring it up at the dinner table with your wife and friends, that you'll share with your grandkids, that you'll think about it. That's the most important part. Think about it before you're davening. Take one a week. Take one idea. Go with it for 7 days of davening. And next week, switch it out for another. And next week, switch it out for another. Level 1 meditation is going to change your life. Okay. Lots of chats going on here. I'm sorry I missed all these conversations. Wow. Okay. All right, folks, we're going to call it a day. Thank you very much.
Monday we're going to do